Okay, we'll get started. I don't know if it's my cord or my computer or what, but it keeps flashing. So I'm going to hold it and hope it stays like this. I have to use my other laptop because I'm recording for the other class tonight. So I think it's connection. So, all right. So we'll muddle through. So if you want to pull it up on whatever you have so you can follow along if this is annoying as it's flashing. Okay, so last class we kind of talked about some characteristics of the clinician's personality, demeanor, things they need to bring into the session, things that they need to be doing with the client to help them succeed in the session. Who can remember some important things as it applied specifically to working with people who are stuttering?
To be patient. Don't put words, don't finish the sentences for them.
Okay.
I don't think we discussed that, but that just came to me.
Yes, so it's another important thing, right? And be patient, right? So if they are having moments of more significant disfluency and stuttering, then obviously, yeah, you want to be patient and let them work through that.
Especially when you take them outside.
Yeah, so if you're doing some kind of desensitization activity, then that's, yeah, you want to encourage them to follow through with the entire activity themselves. We don't want to actually go and help them, yeah, during those moments. You know. Unless you're working on something specific in therapy where you've already told the client, I'm going to cue you to use your strategies. Okay, if I see that you're forgetting, and that's something, you know, as we get further along into talking about therapy, then that would be okay to do, you know. Someone else had a comment, yeah.
The therapy sessions should be client-oriented, so work on words that they're struggling with or activities that they struggle with most.
Right, yes. Not necessarily clinician directed, though obviously you're having a plan and you're running your session. What you might think is important or what you might think you need to work on may not be exactly what the client is thinking is the most problematic for themselves. Yeah.
Don't drill. Like really just, if it's the client's getting it, then let it be, but if they're not getting it, move on to something else.
Yeah, so be reflective and why aren't they getting it, and don't, you know, beat a dead horse, so to speak, okay? Yeah, so you have to kind of, you know, we talked about critical thinking, I think in one of the slides, that, you know, we want to reflect on why isn't the client doing well? What do I need to change, maybe? Not to say we should just abandon things necessarily, but you may need to change your approach, change how you're doing something. Talk to the client also about buy-in. Okay, so they might not be buying into the particular technique or strategy you're trying to help them with. So, yeah. Yeah.
Like with I have a client now who has aphasia, but like he gets super frustrated. I think he like knows the format of what when he sees like me interacting with him, what he struggles with, so he gets frustrated. But like I did it in a different way, and I still got what I wanted in therapy out of him. Okay. He just didn't know that he was still doing the same thing that he was doing before. So instead of just being like, oh, let's just forget this and, you know, forget the fact that you have word finding problems and move on to like memory, you know, not thing to do.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So, obviously with a client who stutters, you know, there isn't the language barrier and the language issues, you know, and awareness. Okay. Clients are very aware, okay, that they're stuttering and where, you know, so, yeah, so no matter what, when whoever you're working with, if something's not going right in your session, okay, then you have to figure out why. But then, obviously, if it's something important that you need to work on, but then maybe bringing more client awareness in that you needed to do, or yeah. So, okay, good. So tonight, kind of moving on, okay, now to talk specifically about the difference. We kind of touched on it with the videos, okay, last week, the difference between normal disfluencies and stuttering. Okay, so now tonight we'll talk about it in a little bit more in detail. Okay, and some statistics, some information as far as the research, you know, differences between boys and girls. And I also included the article in Blackboard on the persistence, okay, of stuttering. So we'll I'll touch base on that a little bit because the findings are very interesting, I think, and something to know going forward. So doesn't seem to be anything I do over my end. It just wants to flicker. All right, so linguistic, there's different ways we can define fluency. So when we talk about linguistic fluency, okay, we're talking about the different parameters of language and communication, okay, as it relates to language, okay. So someone could have a language impairment or a language disorder, okay, and be disfluent when they speak, okay, because they have deficits in syntax, okay, semantics. Alexandra said her client has word finding problems. So I'm sure trying to have a conversation with very difficult, okay? It's not fluent, okay? You may not understand what they're trying to get their point across. Child and or adult with acquired disability could have a disordered phonological system. So they're mixing up sounds. Okay, they're throwing in sounds. So then obviously that distorts the message. They could be putting a lot of effort into thought as far as what sounds they should be using, which then affects rate and prosody and the flow of their message. And obviously, if the individual has pragmatic language impairments, so social communication impairments, you know, your client may not understand turn taking and flow of conversation. They may be quiet at kind of odd times, okay? You know, so their message may not flow normally, okay? Their rate and prosody might be off as well. If you know individuals who are verbal, who have diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, you notice that sometimes their speech output doesn't sound very fluent either, and because of some of those abnormalities in their prosody and rate, and sometimes even word finding difficulties. Okay, so my point is that, you know, those kinds of individuals still could have, you know, fluency difficulties, but what we're focusing on now is speech fluency. Okay, so more of the motor act, okay, of producing speech sounds and words. Okay, so is there a continuation, okay, of speech, okay, without interruption? Is there a good rate? Okay? Are they able to sustain speech, or they're kind of abrupt stopping in blocks? Okay? Are they able to connect speech sounds from one to the other? So it's called co-articulation. Okay? And is the person doing this with minimal effort? So you want to see little cognitive effort, little physical effort, all of those things I mentioned, and to categorize fluent speech, okay, as far as the motor aspect. So we know we're already going to watch the King's Speech in our class here. Okay, there's other characters in these other movies they mention that also portray as having a stuttering disorder. Okay, so you know, the point is that the switching the general public, okay, is aware, obviously, of individuals who stutter, okay, and that it does exist, you know, within our society. Some different terms, you know, in more the Europe and the England and that area of Europe, they refer to stuttering as stammering. And so, but it means the same thing. Some people may say disfluent, okay? But and some, it's very interesting. I've had situations again where parents describe their child as stuttering, and it ends up not being stuttering from what we think of from the motor aspect, okay, of speech production, in that they're having language-based disfluencies. Okay, so because the child has some either language disorder or language delays. Okay, so you'll see that in society, I think parents often confuse what stuttering is sometimes, and then use that term when it really should be disfluent. Okay. When someone has a true stuttering disorder, not necessarily in younger children when it first starts, okay, but as the disorder does continue, then you'll often see accessory, they say, or coping behaviors or secondary behaviors. Okay, so what do you think some of those are? Secondary or accessory, we say concomitant.
Like moving around, they could be looking around, or they could be fidgeting. Another thing, I don't know if that's secondary, but trying to go around the word that they know they can't say, which prolongs the sentence and the meaning of the word, of the sentence, the message.
Yeah, so like kind of circumacute, like around, yeah. So that would be a coping behavior, yeah, avoidance behavior. Mm-hmm.
Avoid, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we can lump that into.
Would that be a secondary?
You could describe it. More so what you're saying people are doing with their bodies. Kind of, what other things do you think someone might do?
Tapping, eye blinking.
Tapping, eye blinking, yeah, some kind of like other like secondary nervous kind of motor act, you know, that someone may demonstrate as it relates to the tension and anxiety that they're feeling when they're stuttering. Okay, so those kinds of behaviors just mentioned, like tapping, like when you're normally nervous or anxious, you know, you tap your foot, you wiggle your leg, starts going, you know, those different things. So it sort of kind of stems from that person ends up demonstrating some of those behaviors, you know, because they associate doing that with being able to get out of the stuttering event or get out of the block. So it becomes habitual, okay, and or just, again, in effect, our client here, OP, when he has more severe blocks and he's having a hard time getting and not using his strategies and trying to push through, okay, then we'll see a lot more tension here in his face, okay, and then he starts doing some facial grimacing and pulling back like this and some kind of distortions to his face. So that would be another secondary, we say, behavior that may happen. All right, so over the course of history, okay, with you know, identification of stuttering and managing and providing therapy to individuals who stutter, you can see, you know, back in the 1940s and 50s, you know, obviously our thinking was very different, you know, about a lot of things, okay, than they are today, okay. You know, development of psychology was happening at that point in time. Lots of different other medical theories were happening. So, you know, lots of kind of, we say, you know, old wives' tales and those kinds of things back in time, as far as what causes stuttering, why a person continues to stutter. Okay, some of it people felt was more of a psychological basis, okay, to it. Some people believed it was more behavioral, okay, and that the person could control it. Some people, theories were that the person was avoiding certain speaking situations, or they had more anxiety, so they started stuttering, okay. So, you know, it's kind of just helpful to know some of the background, and some of the background as far as some of the old theories, okay, of why stuttering occurred. In the fact that you may have some older individuals in society who still hang on to some of those things and not truly understand the disorder, okay. You just may have parents who maybe aren't as educated, okay, about the disorder, or just know about, you know, stuttering, and maybe hear other people talk about some of these causes, which are not founded, okay, but were believed. Another theory is that, you know, parents cause children to stutter, okay. And so, do you know where that came from? That's another, like, psychogenic kind of thing.
Like fear, right? Like that's how they.
Yeah. So fear of what? The child.
Trouble?
What's that?
Like fear. If I'm the child, I'm afraid I'm gonna get in trouble, or like I'm afraid
for stuttering, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So, or that, you know, and again, way back, you know, back in the 50s and 60s, you know, there wasn't, again, a lot of information about how to interact with your child who stutters, okay? So some parents then may ended up doing what?
Isolating
Isolating
their child so that they don't get embarrassed.
Maybe. What else?
Therapy. Like psychology.
Maybe. What else? Someone else says? Well, let's hope not. Okay.
No, like that, wouldn't that just make it worse and just thinking like in the past?
Yes.
Or just like stop it, like stop, like you could stop. You know, that kind of. What are you doing? You can just spit it out, kind of thing.
Yes. Okay. So more of that kind of corrective, kind of penalizing kind of criticisms to their child. Okay. Or yes, just stop what you're saying. Start over. You know, just relax. Think about what you're going to say. Those kinds of things.
Just get it out.
Right. Right. And honestly, my father has commented that my grandmother used to do that a lot with him as a child. Okay. Frequently tell him just to stop and start over and think about what you're going to say before you start speaking, you know, and those kinds of things, which made him feel bad about it, you know, obviously, you know, so. But, you know, again, some parents just didn't know, and they just thought that this is just something their kid's doing. And they didn't really realize that, oh, some kids can develop stuttering, you know, and this is what might be happening, you know, and I may need to interact with my child differently, you know, so. Okay, so there was kind of some developments in the World Health Organization, okay, and how stuttering is classified as a true disorder. You know, so there's been developments now, okay, over time, understanding, you know, about the disorder. Okay, so us as clinicians, okay, we want to make sure, okay, like I said, you're distinguishing between, we say, normal disfluencies, okay, versus stuttering-like disfluencies, okay, and that's what we want to make sure we're identifying. Okay, so in this slide here, on this side, okay, we want to look at some of the typical disfluencies, okay, that could happen, okay. So, whole word repetitions. What do we think about that?
We saw that as an example.
Of?
Well, when the child is repeating the.
So we would.
Like.
Okay, right. So we would categorize that as.
Monosyllabic repetition.
Which would be.
Not a stuttering like disfluency.
Correct. Right. Would say a linguistic-based disfluency or a typical disfluency in a younger child developing language. Phrase repetitions. What do we think about phrase repetitions? Someone else besides Stephanie.
When I hear phrase repetition, I think of like echolalia.
Yeah, no. So echolalia is repeating back what someone has said. Yeah, so if a child has echolalia and I ask the child, what do you want to drink? They would look at me and say, what do you want to drink? And that's echolalia. Or you can have delayed echolalia. So that's different than as you're speaking, you repeat some phrases. So is that stuttering like disfluency or typical disfluency? Yeah, okay, so it'd be, the little girl may have done that also in the video. You know, the red car went down the street. See, I repeated the red car.
That's a disfluency? For kids to talk like that?
Yeah. A lot of kids do it as they're speaking. Yeah, but some people may be concerned that they're not fluent by saying the red car went down the street. They keep repeating, right? And it's very interesting, as I'm talking to my mother a lot too, there was a big concern that my brother was starting to stutter, okay, because it does run in families. I do have other male cousins who did stutter as kids, but they did actually outgrow it. So they don't stutter today as adults. Okay? But there was a big concern that my brother was starting to stutter. Okay? And, you know, my mother, you know, would at times bring it up or talk about how, you know, she would say, oh, thank God Mike doesn't stutter. You know, like, you know, my dad's sitting right there. But then she'd be like, well, we got him therapy. Yes, okay. Kinda. It wasn't like she brought him for direct therapy. It was more, again, she did the parent-directed, indirect kind of therapy. Okay. But I'm 6 years apart from my brother, so I remember a lot of this stuff. And I remember, you know, when he was like 3 or 4, then, you know, I was 9 and 10, so I was older. And I remember, you know, as he was developing language, he had a lot of language-based disfluencies, okay? And we had this, like, crazy kitchen table, and it was kind of like a booth kind of thing, because we had a really small kitchen when I was growing up, and my brother would be laying there on the, you know, the bench seat and trying to, like, talk about the cartoon he watched, and he had his, like, when he's supposed to be eating his dinner, he'd be laying there, you know, at the bench and not eating, okay? And talking about, you know, He-Man, and we're, like, really big back then, and, like, all this stuff, you know, characters, and he would just be going on and on and on about the same character, and it would, like, go nowhere. this story of Girl Out of Nowhere. So many repeats and restarts, you know. And my mother would be like, just let him talk, just let him talk. And she like whisper it, because meanwhile I'm sitting there, I'm like, can he just stop? So, and she's like, the therapist told us not to say anything. Or like whispering to me. I'm like, okay. So, but, you know, now I was kind of explaining, you know, talking about some of this, you know, the difference between language-based disfluencies, like the little girl in the video, like my brother was having a lot. And I said, you know, to my mother, I said, well, did Mike ever really have sound repetitions? So here we have sound syllable repetitions, okay, part word repetitions. I'm like, Mom, did he ever like repeat the sound, okay, or prolong sounds? Like I said, because I said, I don't really remember that so much. Though I was a kid, you know, and she would know. And then she's like, well, no, it just took him forever to say anything. And he just I said, yeah. I said, but we actually categorize that as language-based disfluency. So I said, do you really think Mike was starting to stutter? And she's like, well, I think a little bit. I'm like, okay. Yeah, so I wasn't going to argue. But it's interesting. I think she had so much anxiety over it because my father had the stuttering disorder that as soon as my brother was starting to demonstrate some language-based disfluencies, then it was like, you know, oh my gosh, he's starting to stutter. We have to, you know, which again, who knows? That's probably maybe how my father started out. Okay. And then we'll talk about that, you know, as we go. Some of the things that can be like the perfect storm then of why someone ends up starting to stutter, even though they're kind of starting to demonstrate some of those normal language disfluencies. Maybe if my mother didn't get counseling and some advice and help from a speech therapist of what to do with my brother, then kind of let him grow out of that phase, then, you know, that obviously helped him, you know, so. But it's just interesting to hear her take and then sort of what I remember as well, what was going on. So, but again, I think a lot of parents don't understand the difference. Again, it's kind of circle back to my point about that. And I don't think my mother did either. You know, all of a sudden she just saw him become disfluent, and then it was in her mind more panic, you know, so. Okay, so interjections. Are they stuttering like disfluencies or normal language-based disfluencies?
I think normal language disfluency.
Way at the end of the semester when we talk about cluttering, it could, if the person has excessive use of fillers, then it, along with some other characteristics that could be seen as cluttering. I mean, I'm sure, you know, if you could count how many times I say when I'm talking and lecturing, you know, it would be a lot. So
it could be stuttering and it could be language.
It's never stuttering. That's what so using interjections is never stuttering. So in by itself. Someone who stutters could also use interjections. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. They could use that because they're going to stutter and they do I've seen our client OP do that here. Okay. But if someone just has an overuse of interjections or fillers, or does it could be word finding difficulties. It could be, again, related to their more language fluency, okay, not speech production. Okay, so part word repetition, dysrhythmic phonation. Okay, that's what you want to look at for stuttering like disfluencies. Okay, do you see in the chart there?
Oh, just, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what you want to. they have monosyllabic word repetition there, stuttering like disfluencies, but again, that's not in and of itself. Okay, you really have to be careful. It's really the sound, part word repetition, sound repetitions, prolongations, and dysrhythmic phonation, meaning blocks. So phonation is dysrhythmic, okay, meaning that there's stopping in the phonatory process. The last thing I didn't mention is revision. So if someone says, oh, the old man, no, oh, the old woman. Do you see how I kind of did? So you kind of do a revision or correction. Okay? That's obviously linguistic-based disfluency. Okay? Someone has revisions. Little kids, younger kids may do that a lot. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are we looking at the stuttering like disfluencies as stuttering, or?
Yes.
Okay, so it's like disfluency, but it's just stuttering.
Correct. Okay. So from now on, yeah, your textbook uses the acronym SLD. Okay. Stuttering like disfluencies. Yes. So that is stuttering. Okay. So any type of behavior that we categorize as SLD, stuttering like disfluency, that's true stuttering. Other things that we just talked about, okay, is just disfluency. Okay, but it's not the motor-based, okay, stuttering that we think of when someone has the stuttering disorder. Does that make sense?
Is there a difference with writing disfluency with the Y or the I?
Say that again.
Disfluency, DY or DI? Is there a difference?
I think not really, but I think when they do DYS, it's more to refer to more stuttering kind of motor based. But disfluency DIS, I think it's more the language based. But I wouldn't worry about that. I would just, for our profession, it's stuttering or other disfluencies, okay, and then you can describe what's going on. Is it language based? Is it word finding? Is it just language delay? That's causing, the language based disfluency. This won't go away.
Maybe if you minimize that. Oh.
All right.
Oh my god.
It comes back. Then my computer goes away. All right, I'm gonna have to have another computer next time I do this. All right, so this slide I think is a little better, okay, where it kind of breaks it up for you. Here's stutter type disfluencies, part word repetition, prolongation sound, bus, okay, so I prolonged the vowel, broken word, okay, meaning they're having a block and they don't continue the word, and a tense pause, so tense, not pausing is okay, but there's tension and stress. Okay, you can tell the person wants to continue talking but doesn't. So that would be the tense pause. Okay. And then here, we talked about here, normal type of disfluencies over on that side of the column. Yeah.
For prolongation, it's going to be vowels are consonants?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It could be consonants, like someone could prolong the S, like I could do that too. So it really doesn't matter if it's voiced or unvoiced. It's where they're applying that tension to the word, really. But I would say, it may happen more often, obviously, with continuant sounds than stops. it's hard to prolong a stop. With a stop, it's probably repeated, repetition, you know, for when I was doing stops, up, yeah. Okay. So we talked about also last class that the actual stuttering behaviors, okay, that the person does, the motor kind of behaviors that you can observe and see, okay, is only part of the disorder. So what are some of the other parts to the disorder that we kind of maybe mentioned last week? Yeah.
It's the emotional part of it.
Right. In
It's
what way?
below the surface. They don't want to feel judged,
Mm-hmm.
so they choose either not to speak or go around it. Less socialization.
Right.
make
So
connections.
right. So then it can filter in to then changes in their lifestyle. Right. So you mentioned so there's negative emotions. Okay. Right.
Cause depression.
Okay. Yeah, from what I read, obviously anything can, you know, but it seems from what the research is saying that people who stutter, typically depression doesn't happen. Probably it's because they establish a lot of coping behaviors around it, you know, around the disorder. That's just my opinion, you know, but yeah, so because they then start to attach negative emotions around speaking. Okay, so speaking becomes very difficult, becomes hard, it becomes embarrassing. Okay, and that's one thing my dad mentioned recently when I was visiting them. He said, it's embarrassing as, and I'll say heck, but he didn't say heck. Okay, so he said it's, and he just kind of just shook his head, like, so you can tell, you know, that. And again, it goes back to personality. Okay, my father's a little bit, not even a little bit, a lot of perfectionist. So he doesn't want to stutter. And that's sort of all part of that work you would do with a younger client to try and help them overcome that it's okay to stutter, okay, and we all don't speak perfectly, okay, and to not be as embarrassed by it, okay. But yeah, so these are all the things that are contributing to the bottom parts of the iceberg. Okay, so the iceberg are like all those things related to the emotional impacts of the disorder that you don't see. Okay, and aside from having negative feelings about speaking, okay, then also this feeling of loss of control. Okay, that this is happening to them and they have no control over it. So that's the other aspect of the emotional piece. Okay, so you know when things are happening to you and you don't have control over them, you start to feel helpless, and it does make you feel anxious and tense. So the act of speaking becomes very anxiety driven. Okay, so we'll learn about pseudo-stuttering, okay, as a therapy technique. Okay, but one thing when I use it in therapy with my client OP, okay, in that we all take turns stuttering, you know, with different sentences or different things we're talking about, and we all have to take turns guessing on which word we stuttered on, okay, and what sound and how you make the sound and where the tension was. So we do that. And it's very interesting when OP does a pseudo stutter, okay, that you can very easily determine because there's no tension or stress. He kind of just does it. Versus when he truly is stuttering, you'll see a complete change over him. So that's where interesting to see, you know, effects of tension, anxiety, and stress over the stuttering event. Okay. So young kids, okay, when they start stuttering, okay, most of the time it's very different, okay, than the language-based disfluencies, okay, that we see, okay. And again, I think there's some conflicting research, but according to your textbook, they're saying here stuttering does not appear to rise from normal disfluency, even though I think, you know, in your chapter, though, it does say that a child's reaction, okay, to normal-based disfluencies, okay, and how they react to it can contribute to development of stuttering. So I think that statement's a little off in the slides there. So meaning that if a child is having difficulty finding the word that they want to say, and they keep voicing through it, you see, or they attach a lot of tension and stress, okay, in the laryngeal area as they're trying to say a word, okay, then that can develop, okay, into a stuttering-like disfluency. Okay, so that was something they said in your chapter. All right. However, in early stuttering, okay, so we're distinguishing between stuttering-like disfluencies. So young kids who are stuttering, they're going to demonstrate what this slide is saying. Demonstrate stuttering-like disfluencies. Okay, so it's not that all kids who demonstrate language-based disfluencies are going to end up stuttering. No. Okay, or all kids who end up stuttering start out with language-based disfluencies. No, that's what they're saying. Okay, a kid could start right out, but with having blocks or sound repetitions or prolongations. Do you see? Okay, so going back to the videos that we saw last week, right? We had the little girl who had just the language-based disfluencies, and then the other little boys, okay, who had the stuttering-like disfluencies. Okay, so in a little bit I'll circle back and we'll watch that video again, just so you can kind of see the difference again between the two. All right. Okay, so disfluencies happen initial syllables, okay, and stress syllables. So oftentimes they see that in development of stuttering. Interestingly, with function words, okay, for young children, and content words for older children. So it's just something to be aware of. So one key thing, 2/3 of disfluencies of children with stuttering are stuttering-like disfluencies, okay? So you're seeing a definite large increase, okay, in their disfluencies as being stuttering-like disfluencies in order for a child to be diagnosed with stuttering. Okay. So the statistics say here, okay, the mean age of onset, okay, is 33 months. But there's a range, okay? It says between 16 and 60 months, okay? So there still is a range, okay? But the mean onset is right before age 3, okay, is the onset of stuttering. So looking at just always the age of onset, okay, and what is happening with children and their language development, okay, at that age, okay, and the development of their complex neurological systems and their ability to produce motor wise as far as speech, okay, all of that is developing at the same time, okay. So the speculation, obviously something we always knew, okay, is that something goes awry there, okay, with someone who develops stuttering, okay, in their development, okay, that it ends up becoming motor-based, okay, speech disorder. Okay, so these are just numbers here, okay, that kind of just explain to you children who stutter, okay, have higher, okay, frequency, okay, part word repetitions, okay, so 5.64 compared to children who don't stutter, 0.5, okay, so it's just kind of just to reiterate to you the numbers of what with language samples, with the research, you know, that has been done. Instances of prolongations and blocks, 2.42 versus hardly anything, okay, with a child who does not stutter. Okay. So, stay. Okay. A lot of times the research is saying here only about 20% begin to stutter with unremarkable circumstances. Okay? Most have at least some degree of physical, emotional, or language stresses. So children who stutter can still have repetitions, you know, of short words, initial syllables, but also include, here this is important, prolongations and fixations. Okay. This is getting worse. Okay, so tension. Tension's huge. Okay, and that is a huge contributing factor, okay, to the element of stuttering and how severe, okay, the disorder also presents as well. Here, you know, when you interview parents, though, they may not be able to identify the exact, you know, an instance, okay, where there was some kind of other stress going on with the child when they started stuttering. So I know even specifically in my client OP's case, there wasn't anything that the parents really could report as far as something that happened, okay, why then the stuttering started to continue. So you may or may not identify something like that, okay.
So tenseness, you said, is like a marker of how bad the stuttering will be, like intensity.
It can, yeah. So if the increased tension anxiety, okay, is often correlated then with how severe, okay, the person's stuttering events are, okay. With young kids, you may not see as much tension at first, okay, but then as the disorder develops, then it becomes more obvious. Okay, so with stuttering, when it occurs in kind of a cluster. So it kind of happens together, okay, where you'll have a lot of episodes of prolongations or blocks, okay, or sound repetitions, and then the person will then talk fluently maybe for a little bit, and then all of a sudden they start stuttering again. So that is often a pattern. Okay, and I know specifically clients I've worked with, and even my father, that's sort of what happens. He'll stutter on a few words and then continue talking. Okay, so unless you're dealing with someone, I mean, I have seen, just not personally myself, but I have seen other videos or other instances of someone who has very severe stuttering disorder where it almost seems like every word or every other word they're stuttering. Okay, so I'm not to say that that won't happen, that couldn't happen, but I think that's more rare. Okay, so research also says that even from the very beginning, the children are very aware, okay, that they're stuttering. So I think it was thought years ago that, you know, if you couldn't see any like visible reaction from the child or like anything immediate reaction, that, oh, they don't even know they're stuttering. You know, a lot of parents maybe make that assumption. Or if they're not seeing a lot of tension yet, oh, you know, I don't even think they know they're doing it. They do. Okay, so the research is now saying they do, and they're very aware when it starts. And then, you know, some children will make statements like, I can't talk, you know, or get frustrated, you know, or sometimes have some kind of emotional outburst if they start stuttering. So that obviously, then you know, it's really, you know, they're voicing, okay, their awareness and frustration with it. But some kids won't, okay, but doesn't mean that they're not having those feelings either. Okay? So again, negative attitude about speaking can happen ages 3 to 4. So when it starts to occur, okay, soon after, okay, there's negative feelings about talking. So it kind of I feel like I'm locked into your walls with wires. Makes you think about some of these approaches to therapy with young kids. And I know, like, years ago, a lot of, you know, the recommendations were don't call it stuttering in front of the child, you know, stuff like that. You know, even like my mother was saying, shh, don't say anything, you know, like, just let him talk. I remember reading literature. I remember I subbed at one of the schools. I was for one of the schools with the district I was working for, and I went in and I was going through the file cabinet looking for like worksheets and other like materials and things, and I was pulling out stuff on stuttering. And you know when it's old, like when the papers like are crinkly and like a little yellowed, so I'm pulling it out, and some of this stuff I was like, oh my gosh, like it was so like outdated in the recommendations, okay, that were being made. And what that was, what, you know, don't bring attention to your child's disfluency, you know, basically like ignore it.
It'll go away by itself.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything about
Right,
it.
right. You know, I think the intent was to kind of create a relaxed atmosphere, which is different than ignoring it, okay? And I think the idea was we don't want to make the child feel worse, so don't say anything, okay? But we realized that that's really not effective either. Okay? And other therapies have been developed, and other attitudes and ways we intervene with young kids have gotten better. Okay, so, but I think this research was important to kind of turn that around. Okay, because the idea too was that a lot of times, oh well, the kids don't even know they're doing it; they're really not aware. So, yeah, we'll just kind of ignore it and hope it maybe goes away. Or if we bring attention to it, then they are going to be aware. Okay, and then it's going to be worse for them. So, but now we know they do know. Okay, so it's okay, to bring attention to, acknowledge, okay, that they're having a hard time speaking. Okay, so. How are we doing on time? Okay. Okay, I mentioned clustering. Okay, so meaning that stuttering happens kind of in a group. Okay, so two stuttering-like events together. Okay. It could be other disfluencies and two stuttering events together. Okay, so children with stuttering, so CWS. Okay, that's what that is when you read the slides. Children with stuttering. Okay, they have significantly more and longer clusters of disfluencies. Okay, than NFC. Okay. We'll call it non-fluent children, I guess. But they're saying that other children who have just regular disfluencies. Okay, that's what NFC is. Okay. So the takeaway is that, like I said, stuttering will happen. You'll have multiple events, okay, of stuttering. Okay? Then the person could maybe have some fluent speech, okay, and that's considered clustering. All right, so there's some correlation to a child's phonological development and the onset of stuttering. But it's not clear-cut in the fact that children with speech sound disorders or have delayed phonological development would demonstrate stuttering. Okay, so and children who stutter, their phonological skills do catch up. So they're saying there's a possibility there's a slight delay there, possibly, which may influence then development of stuttering, okay, in some children. Okay. So ultimately, Barry Guitar, he's another guru in the area of stuttering, like Van Riper and Bloodstein, some of those other famous researchers. Okay? So he said kind of the perfect storm of kind of, the theory for the development of stuttering is, again, interaction of hemispheric functioning. So they're saying that there's more right brain activity than left brain activity during language development. A fragile speech production system, okay, and temperamental reactivity, especially time pressure. So temperamental reactivity, do you know what that means? So they have a start here. A reaction to novel or threatening stimuli with higher levels of physical tension. So what would that look like then if a child is having a moment of word-finding problems or trouble saying a particular word as far as knowing what sound to use? And they have a temperamental reaction to that.
Angry?
So, okay, yeah, so they have a feeling, may not be like anger, but like
Frustration.
Okay, a little frustrated, and then the reaction, the frustration, okay, then results in higher levels of physical tension. So then where is the tension being applied? Or face or articulators? And where else?
So it's like,
So you can see it. My client OP, it's like immediate. And like I said, OP. I said, you're doing this. Like it's immediate tense reaction when he has a word finding problem or he's under more linguistic demand. His stuttering is like through the roof then, because it's immediate tension and reaction to, I think, his insecurity. Okay, with he does have some word finding difficulties and some difficulties with narration. So he does have some underlying language, I wouldn't say disorder, but weaknesses. Okay? And especially we talked about this in M group today. Okay, in that he was trying to describe a new storybook. He reads stories that are like in a series. He likes those, and he's doing. He, I guess, read the book for the movie Wonder about the child with the facial anomaly. So he read the book, and then there's a second one. It's like a series. Okay? So he was trying to describe to us what the second one was about. And aside for the stuttering, I still couldn't follow what he was trying to explain, just as far as the word choice and his ability to explain language-wise what the premise was of the book. So Barry guitar, okay, that's again kind of his theory, based upon the research, to date, okay, in that some children, okay, have a reaction to having an episode of difficulty speaking, okay, and then that creates more tension, okay. And then, okay, that can then go into stuttering like disfluency. Okay, so like I said earlier on in lecture, that statement where, children start out with stuttering like disfluencies. Yes, that's what you see. Okay, they may also be having some other language-based disfluencies also that you don't really see. Okay. But again, I tend to agree, okay, with this as far as my experience and what I've seen, working with kids who stutter, as far as their temperament and response to therapy. I've seen other kids who respond very well to therapy, okay, and outgrow the disorder when they have less of a temperamental personality. So personality, I think, does play a role in it too. So, okay. So, let me